Friends, imagine a moment. A fragile ceasefire holds at the edge of hope. 6 long months, over 57,000 lives lost. The Middle East cries out for mercy. Into this scene steps a man known not for quiet diplomacy but for bold declaration, Donald Trump. Tonight, we explore whether he stands as peacemaker or power player. There are moments in history when a man's actions ripple beyond politics and echo in eternity. When Donald Trump stepped into the complex storm of the Israel-Palestine conflict, it was not just a political maneuver, it became a moral crossroad. Leaders can craft policies, negotiate terms, and leverage power, but ultimately, there comes a time when their legacy is weighed not by polls or popularity, but by the conscience of nations and the justice of God. The world watched a unique kind of diplomacy unfold, one not shaped by subtle language or quiet backdoor agreements, but by bold declarations, unapologetic pressure, and a strategic determination to reshape the region on his terms. Ceasefires were proposed, demands were exchanged, hostages were counted, and humanitarian passages were pushed forward. It was a whirlwind of deals and deadlines, and while some praised the boldness and speed of these negotiations, others were left asking, at what cost? A man's legacy isn't simply what he builds, it's what he breaks along the way. The proposal to evacuate and rebuild Gaza raised deep spiritual and ethical concerns. When plans include moving people from their land for the sake of redevelopment, no matter how prosperous that vision may appear, we must pause. We must remember that justice without compassion becomes cruelty, and strength without humility becomes oppression. A powerful hand that lacks tenderness can crush more than it creates. Throughout history, God has shown us what kind of leadership honors him. Micah 6:8 says, "What does the Lord require of you but to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God?" When these are not the cornerstones of diplomacy, peace becomes fragile, and legacies grow heavy with unintended consequences. Some say Trump was the only one bold enough to stand in the gap, to call the bluff of extremists, to challenge the inertia of global politics. Others say he used the ceasefire as a chess piece in a broader strategy of influence and image. Perhaps both are true, for such is the paradox of power. It can rescue or ruin. It can humble nations or harden them. And in all this, the people, the real people, are so often forgotten. The children pulled from rubble, the mothers searching for food, the fathers burying sons. They're not thinking about global strategy or election campaigns. They cry for peace, not power. They plead for bread, not bargaining chips. And if any leader's legacy forgets the human soul, it is a legacy that will not stand in the light of eternity. There was once a man named Solomon, the wisest king to ever rule. He too faced wars, alliances, and diplomacy, but when given the chance to ask for anything, he asked not for wealth or power, but for wisdom to lead rightly. That prayer changed a nation. How different might our world look today if leaders sought such wisdom, not just strategies. Still, history will remember that this ceasefire, though fragile, offered a breath of hope. It pulled both sides back from the brink, even if only for a season. That pause, no matter how short, saved lives. And for that, history may tip its hat, but what comes next, that is the deeper question, for legacy is not a moment, it is a direction. It is the accumulation of choices driven by motives the world may never see, but heaven always does. We must remember, every deal made in darkness is still seen by the one who formed light. Every voice silenced, every child displaced, every tear cried in the shadows. God sees it, and in time, all things hidden will be revealed. No amount of negotiation can outmaneuver his justice. So what then do we do as people of faith, as citizens of this earth, but ambassadors of a greater kingdom? We pray for leaders to walk in righteousness. We call out injustice with boldness. And we never forget that peace, true peace, is not merely the absence of conflict. It is the presence of God's justice, God's mercy, and God's truth. Whether this ceasefire becomes a stepping stone to lasting peace or a pause before greater storms, the legacy being written today will echo in the generations to come. And when the final chapter is written not by journalists, but by the Judge of all, we will see clearly whether a man sought power for his name or peace for his glory. In every major turning point of history, whenever a leader rises with bold ideas and firm declarations, there will be winds of controversy that follow closely behind. And in the case of Donald Trump's role in the recent ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Palestine, the storms have not been few, nor the criticisms soft. When the fire of conflict is still smoldering, and the cries of the innocent still echo in the background, even a well-intended move can stir deep tensions, both politically and spiritually. There were those who watched with admiration, saying he brought strength where others hesitated, and directness where diplomacy had long been entangled in red tape. But there were others, many others, who saw something else. They saw plans that leaned dangerously toward authoritarianism, proposals that whispered of displacement, and visions of rebuilding that seemed to forget those who already called that land home. One of the most unsettling elements of these negotiations was the suggestion of relocating the Palestinian population from Gaza to neighboring nations, an idea that, to many, resembled echoes of history that humanity had vowed never to repeat. To uproot a people under the banner of redevelopment or reconstruction may appear clean on paper, but to the people on the ground it feels like erasure, like being written out of your own story. And this wasn't merely whispered in quiet circles. The international community responded with alarm. Human rights organizations warned of what they called forced displacement and labeled such ideas as violations of international law. For leaders to casually suggest the movement of entire populations, as if human lives are pieces on a board, reveals a profound misalignment with the values of compassion and justice. But that was not the only concern. As negotiations progressed, reports emerged that certain hardline Israeli policies were being given unprecedented space. Netanyahu, who, emboldened by personal ties and political alignment, was seen not as a participant in peacebuilding, but as one holding the reins, steering talks with an uncompromising hand. And many asked, was this truly a balanced negotiation, or a lopsided deal shaped by one man's political vision? Some looked at the handling of hostages, the delivery of aid, the structure of the truce, and they saw not a neutral arbiter, but a calculated strategist seeking to etch his name into the annals of global history. And perhaps more concerning was the notion that these efforts were motivated less by a hunger for healing and more by a desire to solidify influence. When power becomes the goal, peace becomes a tool. And when image overshadows integrity, even well-meaning actions can cause lasting harm. There was also frustration from within the American establishment. Seasoned diplomats voiced concerns that years of delicate balancing, hard-earned relationships, and multi-party trust were being set aside for the sake of speed and showmanship. In bypassing traditional channels, there was a risk of short-circuiting accountability and abandoning nuance to things that peace, especially in the Middle East, desperately requires. Yet in the middle of the noise, one cannot deny this truth: the ceasefire was real. Lives were spared, aid moved in, and for a moment guns were silenced. That, in itself, is no small accomplishment. But when the world begins to peel back the layers, when questions are asked about the cost of that silence, and whose voice was left out of the room, the criticisms grow louder. It is a sobering reminder that even good outcomes can emerge from complicated motives, and even temporary peace can carry the seeds of future pain if built on unstable ground. What appears strong in the moment may crack with time if it was never rooted in truth. In these moments, we are reminded of the ancient words, "By their fruits you will know them." It is not enough for leaders to claim victory. The measure of their leadership must be found in the lives they touch, the dignity they preserve, and the justice they uphold. If the fruits of a plan result in division, displacement, or despair, then no amount of applause can make it righteous. Let us never be so enamored with power that we excuse the path taken to get it. Let us never be so desperate for solutions that we accept them without discernment. And above all, let us never forget that real peace cannot be negotiated apart from righteousness. As the dust settles, these criticisms and controversies will not be forgotten. They are not distractions, they are signposts, warnings, and they challenge every person, every nation, to look deeper than the headlines and to ask, was this truly peace, or simply the pause before a greater storm? There are moments in world affairs when time itself seems to hold its breath, when the thundering noise of war is interrupted by the fragile whisper of peace. In such a moment, a proposal emerged, not from seasoned diplomats nor from long-standing peacemakers, but through a bold and unconventional channel. A plan was laid out, not perfect, not complete, but urgent. A 60-day ceasefire blueprint that would change the rhythm of the Middle East, if only for a season. This was not the product of quiet negotiation or endless committee meetings. No, it came with the weight of bold personalities and high-stakes decisions. The man behind it, a leader known for defying protocol, presented a ceasefire plan that was as ambitious as it was controversial. And at the heart of it lay 5 core components, each one heavy with consequence, and each demanding a response not only from political leaders, but from the conscience of the world. The first point was the most immediate, a full halt to hostilities. After more than half a year of devastating war, where bombs fell and homes collapsed and children knew the sound of drones more than lullabies, the guns were to fall silent, a cessation of fire. 60 days without rockets, without retaliation, without the cycle of destruction that had become all too familiar. It was, at its core, a pause for breath, a divine invitation to reevaluate the cost of human conflict. But it was more than silence. The second measure was clear, the return of hostages. Dozens of lives held between the politics of two sides were to be released in phases. Women, the elderly, the injured, those who had suffered in darkness without certainty or comfort, were promised freedom. Families clung to hope once more, and prayers that had long gone unanswered were lifted again toward heaven. It was a reminder that beneath the strategies and speeches, peace must always begin with people. The third pillar of the plan was not just about war, it was about what comes after. For the ceasefire to hold, the blueprint demanded humanitarian access to Gaza, food, medicine, clean water, not luxuries essentials. Life itself. Convoys were to be allowed, corridors opened, and international relief granted space to reach the broken. And though logistics were debated and political forces hesitant, the need was undeniable. To neglect the wounded after battle is to wage another kind of war, one of indifference. Then came a condition that drew both praise and protest, the repositioning of Israeli forces. According to the plan, troops would gradually pull back from dense urban areas, creating room for displaced civilians to return. Yet the timing and scope of that withdrawal stirred heated debate. Some saw it as a courageous gesture of restraint. Others viewed it as premature and risky. But at its heart, it posed a question older than the conflict itself. Can peace be trusted when scars still bleed? And finally, there was a promise of dialogue, not just empty words, but structured talks to resume after the ceasefire. A path, though narrow, toward something greater than a truce, toward understanding, toward a sustainable solution. The plan dared to imagine that, after so much pain, hearts might still turn toward reconciliation. That even after decades of division, a table could be set where truth and dignity sit side by side, but the path forward would not be easy. Critics claimed the plan favored one side. Others said it did not go far enough. Still others doubted the sincerity of any of the parties involved. And through it all, the people on the ground, the mothers carrying babies through rubble, the fathers searching for food, the children learning to fear the night, waited. Not for statements or headlines, but for peace they could feel. This 60-day blueprint was a test not only of political will, but of human resolve. Could bitterness be set aside for even 2 months? Could hands accustomed to conflict be turned toward compassion, even briefly? Could wounds begin to heal? Not fully, but enough to believe that healing is still possible. There was no guarantee. There never is in matters such as these. But where war offers only certainty of sorrow, peace, even a fragile peace, offers a door of hope. And in those 60 days the world saw a flicker of what might be, if only courage could overcome pride, and if only humility could quiet ambition. In the end, it is not the blueprints that save lives, it is the hearts willing to follow them. And if these 60 days taught us anything, it is that peace is not passive. It must be pursued. It must be protected. And sometimes it must begin with just a pause. In the landscape of global diplomacy, tradition often takes the front seat. Endless negotiations, structured protocols, and layers upon layers of cautious dialogue. But every now and then, someone walks into the scene not with subtlety, but with strength, not with caution, but with conviction. And in the case of recent peace efforts in the Middle East, we witnessed such a figure. A man who didn't tiptoe around the crisis, but charged straight into it, armed with boldness rather than bureaucracy. While others whispered possibilities in closed chambers, he spoke in headlines. Where many feared missteps, he declared direction. This was not diplomacy as usual. It was something else entirely, unpredictable, controversial, but undeniably forceful. And in that force, the deadlock began to shift. There's a kind of urgency that bureaucracy often forgets. When systems get too heavy with tradition, they slow down under their own weight. Paper trails become detours, caution becomes delay, and all the while people suffer. But when boldness enters that space, something powerful happens. Decisions move quickly, responses become sharp, goals become clear. That is what this moment became. A collision between protocol and purpose. The man at the center of it wasn't interested in process. He was focused on results. Where diplomats negotiated language, he demanded outcomes. He brought the pressure directly, personally reaching out to Israeli leadership, insisting on action, not words. He bypassed the familiar paths of foreign policy and instead drew a straight line from proposal to expectation. Beloved, as we reflect, we must remember, true peace isn't born of strategy alone. It is rooted in justice, mercy, and humility. Whether Trump is a peacemaker or power player, only time, and only God, knows. One thing remains certain: in the midst of broken nations, our prayer must not be tied to any man, but to the Prince of Peace himself.